So I think 1919 has remained such an important question for at least two reasons. I mean, there are many, but I'd probably suggest two first. And one, just from the perspective, let's start from the perspective of history, from the perspective of historians. 1919 sits in a very important place within the development of the historical profession of political history, of diplomatic history, that played a kind of outsized role in the development of the historical discipline, especially in the interwar period and in the immediate aftermath of World War II. So many of the great historians very early on in just following 1919 saw in this conflagration of World War I and the peace treaty a kind of story that was necessary for understanding how history operated. And so for that reason, it just sort of had, like other great events, much like, let's say, the French Revolution, it had just a very important role in the development of the historical discipline more generally. I think the second reason, just speaking much more broadly, has to do with the relationship between hope and ideals on the one hand and failure on the other. One of the themes in this conference has been the sort of tremendous ideals that people were coming forward with when they arrived, obviously Wilson, but many others as well. I mean, even the Japanese, in spite of what would happen afterwards when they arrived in 1919, looking for new forms of racial equality and others, and then obviously the ideal of the League of Nations. And so much of what is being talked about seems to be going in a direction that would have led to a better world, with all of the tremendous flaws that were there in terms of empire and racial inequalities and domination. But there is, at some level, you can read some of these documents and be quite impressed with certain the vision they're offering. And at the same time, the complete failure to impose many of those ideals. For example, the fact that the racial equality ultimately and almost entirely fails in the way that Japan had originally presented it. The idea that France and Britain and the United States will maintain their empires at the same time that they dismantle the German Empire in the name of some sort of self-determination. And so just the basic contradictions that they find themselves within, their inabilities to really overcome their own positions, and then, of course, as we know, ultimately the great symbol of the failure, which is the rise of fascism in Europe, and ultimately the Second World War, even if there is no straight line from one to the other. So I'd say this sort of the sense of hope and the idea that maybe this could have been a great moment at the end of what was referred to as the Great War, and the very real sense that it didn't in any way achieve that greatness.